With us today on the summit is Dr. Tom OBryan. Tom, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure. It's such an important topic that I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Thank you. I'm just going to share with our audience a little bit about your bio. So Dr. Tom OBryan is an award-winning author and internationally recognized speaker on food sensitivities, environmental toxins, and the development of autoimmune diseases, and is considered a Sherlock Holmes for chronic disease. He holds faculty positions with the Institute of Functional Medicine and the National University of Health Sciences, and has trained and certified tens of thousands of practitioners around the world. Dr. Tom is the producer of the video series entitled Betrayal, the Autoimmune Disease Solution They're Not Telling You, which has been seen by a worldwide audience of now more than 500,000. Wow, you've been at this for quite some time, haven't you?
Oh my goodness, it was 2013, January of 2013 that my friend JJ Virgin got me to come to one of her events, and I'd never gone to any of these events. And at that event, I actually raised my hand and said, "Excuse me, can you tell me what an affiliate is?" Because I didn't really understand any of that world. And it was that weekend that I decided I've been playing way too small. It's time to just go out there, even though I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, I'm going to interview the world leaders on celiac disease and wheat-related disorders outside of celiac disease. And I'm going to put it online. Will you guys help me? And everyone in the room said, sure, we'll send announcements out for you. So I did the Gluten Summit, came out in November of 2013. It was the first summit to come out ever. And so I did this thing. And we just made it up. We didn't know what we were doing, but I went to Oxford, England, and interviewed the godfather of celiac disease and leaders all over the world. And it was so successful that my friends called and said, how did you do that? How did you do that? I want to do that on detox, or I want to do that on thyroid. And I said, well, we just made it up. There is no playbook. We just made it up. And they said, can I talk to your staff? Is that okay? I said, sure. So my staff then called me within a couple weeks, said, Doc, so many people want us to do this for them. Let's form a company and let's do this. And I said, oh, you guys go ahead. It's not my passion. It's not my dream, but you guys go ahead. And that was a formation of Health Talks Online, which has carried out most of the summits in the last 6 years that tens of millions of people have seen.
Yeah, and they're obviously our partner as well in getting this out. So that's a really fascinating story. I'm so glad that you follow that intuition to get powerful information out to the world, and I can relate to that because with Take Back Your Power, my film exposing smart meters, when I first started that in 2011, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never made a movie, but this information needs to get out. So it ended up taking 2 years. It was a passion project that I'm so blessed to have more than 500 people contribute to make that, to get that out. But yeah, you just make a decision and the way opens up, right? So thank you so much for.
You bet. That's the important point here, is that I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
You didn't know what you were doing, but we just had the passion. And I think that's the key to doing such fulfilling work in life, that it's not work. Mm-hmm. It's fulfilling. It gives you the juice of life when you're doing what you're here to do.
Yeah, that's right. So in this journey, when did you first learn about electromagnetics?
My first week in my medical education, I'd gone to Chicago. My wife was still in Ann Arbor because she had to continue for 4 more months to get her degree. So I come to Chicago, I'm alone. And the first week, there was a sign in the hallway that said, Dr. Sheldon Deal, Mr. Arizona, was going to be speaking this weekend about electromagnetics. This is January 1978. So I go to this seminar, and for students, it was like $20 or something. And I go to the seminar, and Dr. Deal had a color television on in the room with the volume off, but the picture was on. And he walked over to his briefcase at a table, opened it up, and took out a bar magnet the size of an iPhone. And, and he walked up to the color television and the picture went upside down. And he walked away, it went right side up. And he walked towards it, it went upside down. And he walked away and went right side up. And he said, that's what electromagnetic pollution does to your brain and your nervous system. It's called neurological switching. And you get switched. And those people say right when they mean left. They write backwards, or they write numbers backwards, or they're going for their right foot and they lift up their left foot. But there's some switching going on. And that was 1978. And what he was teaching about was his concern about batteries on your body. And what was that? Electric watches had come out just a few years before or something, but electric watches. And so he was talking about that battery on your wrist and how it affects your nervous system. So that's when I first heard about that. And then 1979, I came across a research paper that said children that live within a quarter mile of high-power tension wires have a much higher incidence of lymphomas and cancers in general, and mostly lymphomas. 1981, there was a paper that came out that said adults higher incidence of cancers if they live within a quarter mile of high-power tension wires. So this information has been kind of trickling out since 1980s. Of some damage. And this is just peripheral. I wasn't focusing on this. These papers just came across my desk as I was looking at concepts about holistic healthcare and functional medicine.
Wow. And so it obviously it snowballed from there, and it seems like you've stayed with it. You told me before, when we were booking this interview, you've been studying 5G for the past 8 months or so, right? So we'll get into that in a moment. I wanted to first just sort of like zoom out and just kind of tap into the breadth of your knowledge and ask you, what's causing the increase? If you could sum up in a minute or two, perhaps, what is causing the increase in these exponentially, increase of germless chronic diseases that we're seeing in this generation?
Really good question. The journal Pediatrics is the #1 journal for healthcare for children in the world, Pediatrics. If you get an article published in that journal, you've really scored. That means it's gone through very critical review and they accepted it and they published it. There was a policy statement in the journal Pediatrics, the #1 journal. And so a policy statement is not an author, it's the board of directors of the American Academy of Pediatrics trying to get a message to us. And they said the Toxic Substance Control Act of 1974 failed miserably to protect children from the potential health detriments of toxic chemicals. And they went on to say that in the almost 40 years that it has been the primary regulatory guidelines for the chemical industry, it still is, the TSCA Act of 1974, 5 chemicals or classes of chemicals have been regulated in 40 years. 5. There's thousands that come on the market every year, but there's no safety studies for any of them. There are no safety studies for flame retardants in your baby's clothing, or in baby's crib mattress cover, or in baby's blanket, or your blankets, or your down comforters that are soaked in flame retardant chemicals. There's no safety studies anywhere on them because the manufacturers are not required to do it, because the Toxic Substance Control Act is so cumbersome, the government can't regulate these industries. It's up to the public to pay for the research, the government, our money to pay for the research, but the government doesn't have a research organization. The EPA is a regulatory agency. It's not a research agency. So we don't have any protection, and people don't know this, and they think, oh, that can't be true. This is America. This is true. The lobbyists in Washington at that time were very successful to get the teeth taken out of the Toxic Substance Control Act and have so many side provisions that it's failed. Now, this is the policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics, right? And they said it's 247 pounds of toxic chemicals per person per day that are being manufactured or imported into the United States. 247 pounds. That's for you and me. That's 500 pounds. That's 10 50-pound bags every single day that are being manufactured or imported into the US, and that doesn't include pharmaceuticals or petroleum products. It's like, what? What? But it's the plasticizers, the phthalates that are in the lining of coffee cups and in the lids of coffee cups. And that stuff gets into your body and it accumulates. I'll give you one example of the accumulation effect. 346 pregnant women, they do urine analysis. They measure the urine for 5 phthalates. Now, there are hundreds of phthalates that are in our bodies, and everybody's got them now, but they measure 5. One was bisphenol A, or BPA, the one that many people have heard of. They categorize the results into 4 quadrants: the lowest quadrant, the next quadrant, the third quadrant, and the highest quadrant. They followed the offspring of these pregnant women, and when the offspring turned 7 years old, they did IQ tests on them, standard sophisticated IQ tests. Every child, not the majority of children, every child whose mother was in the highest quartile of phthalates in urine in the 8th month of pregnancy, compared to the children of mothers whose phthalates in urine in the 8th month of pregnancy were the lowest level, every child in the highest level, their IQ was 7 points lower than the kids in the lowest quartile of phthalates. It was 6.7 to 7.4 points, 7 points lower. Now, 1 point lower is noticeable. 7 points lower is the difference between a student studying really hard, getting straight A's, and a student studying really hard, getting straight C's. They just don't have the neural network. It didn't develop because phthalates inhibit neurogenesis, a geek word for making new brain cells. Phthalates inhibit that. So when mom was higher in phthalates, baby's brain didn't develop properly. Now, what are phthalates? Nail polish. Every time you put nail polish on, within 3 to 5 minutes, there's phthalates in your bloodstream. No study shows that's toxic. There's no study that shows that amount of phthalates are toxic. Lipstick. Every time you put lipstick on, unless it's organic, phthalate-free, you get phthalates in your bloodstream. No study that shows that that's toxic levels. And we inhale it. The house dust, if you've got plastic blinds on the windows, the house dust has phthalates in it because the phthalates leach out of the plastic or the plastic coffee pot. And it's in the house dust and you're breathing it in. No study shows the amount of phthalates in house dust is toxic to humans. And that's how they get away with this stuff and get it diffused. But this stuff accumulates in your body. Like a 28-year-old woman who's pregnant for the first time, who's got a high level of phthalates. There's 28 years of accumulation of these minor amounts that accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. The result is a whole generation of children now who are coming out that have compromised brain development. That's the primary reason why autism is going through the roof. It's not vaccinations. I tell docs on stage all the time, don't ever say vaccinations cause autism. If they did, every child would be autistic. But it's very legitimate to say vaccinations may cause autism if it takes the child over the edge.
Over the edge.
So lots of studies.
So do you see like there? Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to jump in. Do you see there's like a threshold at which perhaps is different for every human being of like a toxic load threshold, and then once you're past that, whether it's chemical or environmental or electromagnetic radiation, once you're past that, then you start exhibiting symptoms on a deeper level. How do you see that whole toxic threshold? Okay.
High five. That's the takeaway we want from every listener.
Okay.
That it's not EMFs, It's not gluten. It's not phthalates. It's not vaccinations. It's the whole world of toxicity that we're being exposed to. Joe Mercola published a paper that said since 1918, since World War I, in the last 100 years, it's 1 quintillion fold higher levels of EMF exposure. In 100 years, it's 1 quintillion fold increase. We don't have an immune system to deal with this. Our immune, Mrs. Patient, your body is just like your ancestors 5,000 years ago. Your kidneys work the same. Your gallbladder works the same. Your lungs work the same. Everything works the same. We use our brains more, so we've got more creature comforts and easier access to food and all that, but our bodies work the same. Your immune system is the armed forces in your body. It's there to protect you. There's an Army, an Air Force, a Marines, a Coast Guard, a Navy, IGA, IGG, IGE, IGM. They're all branches of the armed forces trying to protect you. What did our ancestors have to fight against and be protected from? Bugs, parasites, viruses, molds, fungus, and bacteria. That's it. Bugs, parasites, viruses, molds, fungus, bacteria. I'm a go-to guy in the world about wheat-related disorders. I travel the world teaching about this, and you don't have to have celiac disease to have devastating results. But what does wheat do? For every person, wheat activates a sentry standing guard in your immune system called toll-like receptor 4. And what it is, it's like an antenna that sticks out into the lumen of the intestines, and if there's any bugs that are trying to get in, toll-like receptor 4 invites them in, they get here, it sends a message on, we got bugs. And then your immune system gets activated to fight the bug, to make inflammatory compounds to fight the bugs. Toll-like receptor 4 is the sentry standing guard. Wheat stimulates toll-like receptor 4 in every human.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I just have a question about that. How come, for example, I can eat wheat that is a pizza made in Italy, but I can't eat North American wheat? Is there a difference?
Yeah, there is. And that's a segue, but a lot of people have that question. There are many compounds in wheat that trigger an immune response. 62 have been identified. Most doctors, the labs they use, they check one. It's called alpha-gliadin, or they'll call it gluten, but it's alpha-gliadin they're checking. It's a 33 amino acid peptide. It's really important to check. About half of the celiacs have that as the trigger activating toll-like receptor 4. But the other half don't. They've got other peptides of wheat that the immune system is fighting, causing the problem. When you get symptoms from eating wheat, the lucky ones are the ones that get symptoms in their gut. They eat something, they feel it. Can't argue with that. The unlucky ones are the ones, they eat something, they don't feel it, but you're causing damage to your brain or to your eyes or to your joints or to your skin. But they don't feel it when they eat it. It's the next day that they've got brain fog, or it's the next day that their thyroid's not working too well and they have a hard time getting out of bed. And they don't associate what they ate yesterday is the trigger for the symptoms they're having today. And the ratio is 8 to 1. For every one person with gut symptoms, there are 8 that don't have gut symptoms. They have symptoms somewhere else in the body. And the Italians call it, when it's anywhere else in the body, a loss of well-being. So when you have a response, a negative response from wheat that's anywhere in the body but the gut, it's called a loss of well-being. What we know in the compounds of wheat is that the compound of wheat that stimulates a gut response, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, a little bit of pain maybe, that compound of wheat is called FODMAPs, fermentable carbohydrates. And it's the proteins of wheat, the glutens, the glutenins, the gluteomorphins, there's a bunch of different proteins. They are responsible for the loss of well-being, whether whether it's your brain, your ears, or something. Well, the wheat in Europe is much lower in FODMAPs. So you don't get the gut symptoms when you eat the wheat in Europe. So you think you're fine. You think you're fine, but you're not, because you still activate the immune response, which you don't feel. And then, Mrs. Patient, you pull at a chain, it breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, middle, the other end. It's your heart, your brain, your liver, your gut, your kidneys, wherever the weak link is. So if your genetic weak link is your brain, when you eat wheat, you get elevated antibodies to myelin basic protein, which is the saran wrap around your nerves, that when that goes, you get MS. Or you get elevated antibodies to cerebellum. That's the brain, part of the brain that controls muscle movement. And when that starts to go, those are the elders that can't walk up and down stairs very well. And it's not their muscles are weak. It's that they don't have brain control of their muscles and they have to hold the railing, right? And that's called cerebellar atrophy. When it gets really bad, it's called ataxia. But there are many 70-year-olds that can dance up and down the stairs, even though they can dance on a straight floor without effort, because their muscles are good, but they don't have proprioception to tell distance and to walk the stairs. That's your cerebellum that's been being killed off for 30 years, 40 years, little by little by little, if that's the genetic weakness. So that's the whole FODMAP thing. So back to this loss of tolerance. 247 pounds of toxic chemicals per person per day, a quintillion-fold increase in EMF toxicity. And nobody argues with the danger of X-rays. Everybody knows X-rays are a problem. And there are solar flares. I mean, the sun erupts, the solar flares are in 11-year cycles. It peaks, it starts to come down, 11 years later it peaks again. And when you're at the peak of an 11-year cycle, when you fly from New York to LA, you get the radiation exposure of 7 chest X-rays every time you fly. Now, at the low end of the 11-year cycle, it's 1 to 2 chest X-rays. At the top end, it's 7. But that's why pilots have the highest incidence of lymphomas of any profession in the world, and flight attendants have the highest incidence of reproductive disorders, miscarriages and infertility of any profession in the world, is because they're being exposed to EMFs all the time, constantly. So it's now your immune system designed to protect you is designed to protect you from bugs, parasites, viruses, molds, fungus, and bacteria. But now it's having to deal with 247 pounds of toxic chemicals per person per day. It's having to deal with the types of foods that are no longer the foods that your grandparents ate that came from the earth. Now these foods are coming from hydroponics and they control what's going into them. There's lots of chemicals on the foods if you're not eating organic. And even on some organic food, there are chemicals because the politics are getting involved now and all that. The fish have plastic inside the meats. It's called microplastic that's in the meats because the fish are swimming in oceans that are full of plastic. So these plastics start to break down eventually and they get inside the fish. So we have all of these different toxins we're exposed to that never before in the history of humanity have humans had to deal with this. And that is the primary reason why the Alzheimer's Association tells us 1 elder in 3 currently dies with dementia. 1 in 3, whether it's diabetes or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, whatever it is, but 1 in 3 dies with dementia. That's the current statistic. So if we had one more person on this call, one of the 3 of us will die of dementia. That's how common it is. In a family of 5, 2 of you are going to die of dementia. Why? Because the brain is the most sensitive tissue, and all of these different things that are coming at us all day, the only way your immune system can respond is a bug, parasite, virus, mold, fungus, or bacteria. And what happens when the immune system responds, thinking that it's one of those 6 that are coming in? It triggers an inflammation. It turns the genes on. Kill that thing, break that thing apart and get it out of here. And that's what your immune system is doing, trying to protect you. So the result is we get all this inflammation, and the inflammation causes the tissue damage that causes the degeneration, that causes the lack of function eventually of the organ, that causes the organ dis-ease that causes the organ disease.
Okay, let's dive in. Thank you for that. That's a really profound overview, and there's so much wisdom and dot connecting in that is going to be helpful for going forward here. Let's dive into the wireless and the millimeter wave, part of this discussion now. Millimeter wave being associated with 5G. What have you discovered? What are you seeing? What are you learning? What are you concerned about? How big is the risk?
There's never been a risk, as far as I know. No, there has been one risk larger. But there's only one risk larger than the risk assessment coming from our scientists that we're hearing today, who are not involved in the corporate production of the risk. In other words, independent scientists, our university professors who are not getting grants from the industry. And they're saying this is the largest risk they've ever come across, aside from one. What was the other one? Above ground nuclear explosions in the late 40s and 50s in Nevada. And they said, oh, this is safe. You can go back to the papers, Chicago Tribune, front page, nuclear bombs are safe as long as we're far enough away. Don't worry about them. And the 1950s, it was nuclear bombs they said were safe. In the 1960s, it was cigarettes they said were safe. And they have commercials with doctors with a stethoscope hanging over there. That's the holy instrument. They put a stethoscope over in a picture, and all of a sudden there's authority there. And the doctor's smoking a Camel, the ones doctors recommend most. So the marketing that's done on all this stuff. In the 1970s, it was bovine growth hormone. In the 1980s, it was margarine. It's safe for you. In the 1990s, here comes the EMFs starting now to show itself. 1990s, it was GMO. In the 2000s, it's EMFs. And the independent scientists, and there are so many papers now that talk about the dangers. I mean, when you listen to NPR, and you hear the study, and they've gone to interview the kids, the 8th grade class that took a pack of seeds. I think they were tomato plants, I don't know. And they bought a thing of dirt and some containers. And they put the dirt in a sheet pot, a big sheet pot, and they put the seeds in there. And someone else was in charge of the watering, and they did that in 2 containers. And they did the exact same thing in both containers. And they put them on the shelf so the sunlight would hit them in different rooms. And one room, the shelf was right below the router, the wireless router. In the other room, there was no wireless router. And they just watched what happened. And in the room with no wireless router, here come the sprouts after a number of days or a week or so, and they're growing. And they go run around to the other room. There's no sprouts. There's no growth. There's no germination. And then, the sprouts grow and they're big and tall, and they take pictures of them. They go around the other room. There's no sprouts. There's no germination. And you hear just simple things like that. And then we have our scientists that work for the industry and say, there's no evidence that there's any danger with this. And we know, come on, really? Come on now. So one of the things, for example, that I recommend that people consider, just to reduce the EMFs that you have control over right now, is get a case on your phone, right? This is a Pong, P-O-N-G. And I don't know if it's the best one or not. I got it on Amazon. But I drive an Acura. And when I walk up towards the car, my key sends a message to the car, and the dome lights come on the inside, and the lights by the door handle come on, if it's nighttime, as I'm walking to the car. Because the key sent a message, here we come, right? But if I'm holding my keys in the same hand as my phone with the Pong cover on it, there's no message that goes to the car. And say, oh, what's wrong? And I can't unlock the car. Oh, wait, and I have to take the phone out of this hand, and then I can, with my other hand, unlock the car. Because I've got the keys in this hand now, right? So I know these work. To some degree, they work. And there might be better ones. I don't know. And you'll know, maybe, on this summit, you'll have people talking about that. I'm no expert in that. but I know it works. And we have to be aware that the amount of toxic exposure we're being exposed to, whether it's chemical toxins, food toxins, electromagnetic toxins, this is accumulative, and that our bodies are not designed to deal with this. That's why the incidence of dementia and autism is going through the roof, is because your brain is the yellow canary in the coal mine. And for those of you that don't know, coal miners used to take a cage with a yellow canary down into the mines. And if the canary falls over dead, you know there's a methane leak before any humans can smell it. And so they get out of there real quick, right? That's the yellow canary in the coal mine. Your brain is the yellow canary in the body's coal mine, if you will. So when you've got brain function, whether it's brain fog or it's memory lapses, you've got a problem here, and your body's trying to tell you something.
What does the science say, or what can you tell us about the link between EMFs, microwave or millimeter wave radiation, and the rise in autoimmune and other conditions that you're seeing either in your practice or in the science, published science? What can you tell us about that?
There is no question, absolutely no question. In my book that came out in 2016, The Autoimmune Fix, won the National Book Award. It's like, yes, yes, because it's a really good book. You know, there's no marketing. I didn't have a marketing team for this, but it's a really good book. We show you the studies that identify it's the inflammation that comes up that is the fuel in the development of Hashimoto's thyroid or psoriasis or losing your hair, alopecia. It's the inflammation. And where's the inflammation coming from? The inflammation is coming from the damage to your cells. Your cells get damaged, like with wireless, your cells get damaged in a way, not mainly, but primarily. Primarily, the first thing you look at is the damage to the mitochondria. The furnace in every cell is the mitochondria. That is extremely sensitive to EMF toxicity. And when you cross the threshold of EMF toxicity, you're getting mitochondrial damage. That produces a compound called peroxynitrate. Peroxynitrate, have you ever started a charcoal fire and you squirt some charcoal lighter fluid on it and you light a match and you throw it on there and it doesn't catch? You ever had that happen?
Yes.
You know, most guys, right? So what do? You light another match and you gently lay it on the coals so it doesn't go out. And you squirt the charcoal lighter fluid, not at the match because it'll drown the flame, it goes out. You squirt it at the charcoals next to it so the spray will catch, igniting, and then the thing will ignite, right? What happens if initially you had poured gasoline on those charcoals and threw a match in there? That's peroxynitrate in your cells. It causes so much reactive free radicals and reactive oxygen damage. It's one of the most powerful damaging compounds that gets produced as a response to your immune system trying to protect you, right? And then it has to try to get rid of peroxynitrates. Mm-hmm. And peroxynitrates go up as you increase EMF exposure.
Okay, so is peroxynitrate a naturally occurring thing that somehow increases in its prevalence and its toxicity and its activity with the increase of electromagnetic radiation?
One would assume, and there's a normal reference range for peroxynitrates when you test for it. There's a normal reference. When is it normal? Well, it's normal when your immune system's trying to protect you from something. You got a scratch and you got some bug in your body, and so the immune system's trying to kill off that bug. And if it's damaged some of the cells around the area, you might have a little peroxynitrate, a little bit. It's fine. It's part of our immune response. Damage occurs, the immune system has to get activated to go in there after it. So, but the amount that we're getting, just turn your phone on wherever you live and see how many wireless networks are that you can connect to right now. That's how many different wavelengths are hitting your body. that we don't have any defense mechanism against them. We don't. Bugs, parasites, viruses, mold, fungus, and bacteria. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we're designed to have defense against.
That's correct. We're not designed, and we don't have a defense against electromagnetic pollution.
What are your concerns? What do you think would happen with people's health if 5G is allowed to be deployed everywhere with, small cells every few homes with the 20,000 satellites, let's say, if this thing just goes forward as industry wants to without any change in course, what's your anticipation based upon your, all of your knowledge and experience and the science?
Devastating, completely devastating. Currently, we're at the stage where, because of the toxic chemicals, mainly because of the toxic chemicals, between 1974 and 2011, they did an analysis. It's called a meta-analysis. They look at a whole bunch of studies on one subject. The subject was sperm count in healthy men, not infertile men, in healthy men. And in that 37 years, there has been a 59% reduction in sperm count. Now, that's just a number that everybody's numb to. It doesn't mean anything until you find out scientists worry about extinction of a species at 72%. We're at 59% in 37 years. What do you think is going to happen in the next 20 years? And then just go to Google and type in EMFs and sperm count and look at the studies where they say there seems to be a correlation here between this. Just look at the studies and then imagine with 5G, which is much more powerful, what do you think is going to happen? Right? I mean, to say, if you were a practitioner and you tell patients 5G is harmless, it's okay if it's outside your house, that's, if you don't know, then that's just has to be written off to, he didn't take the time to study this. But if you know and you say it anyway, that's malpractice, because you're putting patients in harm's way. There's no question about EMFs in general, and now this most powerful of EMF producing networks, which is launching now in a number of cities already in the US. There's no question that for people who have come up against the wall of oral tolerance or immune tolerance, I'm so used to saying oral tolerance because I talk about wheat, but immune tolerance, when you come up against that threshold, now here comes 5G, takes you over the threshold, wherever the weak link is your chain is. So I imagine within 5 years, we're going to see studies on kidney disease and kidney cancer and bladder disease and bladder cancer and brain diseases and brain cancer, all being associated with 5G. And the joints and the skin and the hair, and there won't be a tissue in the body that we won't see an association with crossing the threshold in electromagnetic pollution.
Wow. Can you talk about, you mentioned leaky gut and leaky brain. Is there science, is there experience or knowledge that you could share about leaky brain or leaky gut and the wireless proliferation?
You bet. If I explain the gut first, it helps to understand the brain. Mrs. Patient, your digestive tract is a tube. It's 20 to 25 feet long, starts at the mouth, goes down to the other end. Imagine a donut. If you could take a donut and stretch a donut out, one big long donut. If you look down the donut, it's one big long tube. So when you swallow food, it's in the donut. It's not in your body yet. The food's got to go through the walls of the donut to get into the bloodstream. So now it's in your body. And that's the process of digestion, is breaking these food compounds smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Snip, 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 snip. Well, the inside of the tube is lined with a cheesecloth. And the cheesecloth only lets really small molecules get through. So the big molecules can't get through until they've been snipped down small enough to get through. Well, what happens, for example, wheat tears the cheesecloth every time you eat it, but the fastest growing cells in your body are the inside lining of your gut. You have an entire new lining every 2 days. So you eat toast for breakfast, you tear the lining, it heals. Eat a sandwich for lunch, you tear the lining, but it heals. Pasta for dinner, croutons on your salad, a cookie, tear the lining, but it heals until one day you cross the threshold, you don't heal anymore. Now you got leaky gut. And what that means is that the cheesecloth gets torn and it doesn't heal because it tears every time you eat wheat, but usually it heals until you lose oral tolerance and you don't heal anymore. Now you have intestinal permeability. Now these molecules that are going down the track being snipped around, smaller and smaller, but now these larger molecules called macromolecules can get through the tears in the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. And they're not supposed to be there. And your immune system says, whoa, what's this? This is not good for me. I better fight this. This is not something I can use to make new brain hormones or muscle cells. It's not a raw material that I recognize. It's not calcium or amino acids. I better fight this. Now you make antibodies to tomatoes or to pickles or to chicken or to beef. And that's the person that does a 90 food blood test panel to see what you're sensitive to. And it comes back you're sensitive to 25 foods. And you say, oh my God, that's everything I eat. Well, of course it is. Your immune system's trying to protect you. There's nothing wrong with your immune system. It's trying to protect you. You got tears in your cheesecloth. And so when you heal the cheesecloth and you wait 3 months, then you go back and check 3 to 6 months, you go back and check. Now you're sensitive to 2 foods, maybe 3. And those are the ones you stay away from long term. But that cheesecloth concept, I know of 4 areas of the body that have that cheesecloth: the lungs, the gut, the kidneys, and the brain. And it's called an epithelial lining. Now, it's the epithelial lining, the cheesecloth of the brain, that's the tightest. It's got the smallest holes and lets the least amount of stuff to get through in the brain. So it's really tight, and it's called the blood-brain barrier. Now, scientists call it a breach of the blood-brain barrier. I call it B4, capital B, number 4. So you don't have to say these geeky words like breach of the blood-brain barrier. You say, you know what? I wonder if I've got B4. And so when you have B4, larger molecules get through the blood-brain barrier into the brain that aren't supposed to get there. They're okay to be in the bloodstream, maybe, but it depends. If you got leaky gut, they're not supposed to be there. But even the molecules that are okay to be in the bloodstream are too big to be in the brain. Only the really small molecules are allowed to get through into the brain. That's the purpose of the blood-brain barrier. But when you get B4, a breach of the blood-brain barrier, tearing the cheesecloth of the brain, you get these big molecules getting in there. And when you do, we have 4 different immune systems in the body, and the most powerful of the immune system in the gut is like the town marshal. You know, town marshal keeping the peace in the town. He's got his 6-shooter. You know, any problems, the old cowboy towns, he pulls out his 6-shooter. So that's the town marshal. But then there's the sheriff. The sheriff is like for the county, and the sheriff has a rifle. Then in your bloodstream, and the sheriff is in the liver, called Kupfner cells. Then in your bloodstream, you've got an immune system called antibodies. That's special forces with high-powered rifles. These guys are target specific. You make antibodies to wheat, you got a problem with wheat, right? And you make antibodies to tomatoes, you got a problem with tomatoes, because they're not there unless they've been instructed that there's a problem with this food, get rid of it. Then the 4th one is the immune system of the brain. Now that one, they're called glial cells. They fire bazookas. They don't mess around. Anything that gets through the blood-brain barrier activates the glial cells, and here comes the bazooka to destroy it immediately, no messing around. Well, that's great, except if you've got B4 and there's a continual influx of new things into the brain that aren't supposed to be there, you're firing bazookas all day long, you get a lot of collateral damage. some of the brain tissue starts to get damaged, the brain cells. Then your immune system has to make antibodies to get rid of the brain cells, the damaged brain cells. Now you develop an autoimmune mechanism of the brain. And that's a very common scenario. Now, here's the kicker. EMFs have been shown to cause B4, a breach of the blood-brain barrier. I haven't seen a study yet on 5G and the blood-brain barrier, but I would wager $1,000 that you're going to see that 5G is much worse at causing B4 because it's a much more powerful signal. And when you get B4, a breach of the blood-brain barrier, and these molecules get in the brain, your immune system in the brain, trying to protect you, is going to destroy those things. But here comes all the collateral damage from the repetitive explosions going on in the brain.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So how do you, I mean, Sasha Stone has a video out there called 5G, Apocalypse Extinction Event. How do you see this risk, this level of risk? And I'm a little bit hesitant, I'm a little bit on the fence and kind of trying to find that the best way to communicate to people the level of risk so that you don't turn people off and you don't, alarm them or put them into so much fear that they run the other way. Before we talk about communicating this, I wanted to ask you, is that appropriate to be considering this as a possible or even probable extinction event if it doesn't get sorted? Like, how you're talking about basic neurological function being affected by the rollout of untested technology that's showing a link to those fundamental neurological conditions by the B4, by breach of the blood-brain barrier. Help us contextualize this, Doc. What are we talking about?
I don't have enough knowledge to make a prediction about the impact of 5G, whether it's apocalyptic or not by itself. But the loss of tolerance because of 247 pounds of toxic chemicals per person per day. Every newborn child in America today has at least 200 toxic chemicals that aren't supposed to be in their blood. Every child that's checked. Just read the studies on this. And many of them are neurotoxins. So extinction of the species, it's on the horizon. It's called the sixth extinction. And if you Google the sixth extinction, you see that our scientists at the National Academy of Science are saying there's no technology to fix this. 50 to 70 years from now, we don't know that humans can survive. And you read this and you go, wait, I can't listen to this. I'm going back to have a beer, or whatever people do. We have to wake up, and then we have to have a protocol or a way of approaching these overwhelming problems that never before have humans had to experience. Never before. We know, for example, there are 5 stages of change. The first stage is pre-contemplation. You're not even thinking about the problem. I don't want to hear it. It's got nothing to do with it. It's fine, right? And we've all said, if you don't know, you don't know. You live in bliss. You're living in bliss. The second stage is contemplation. Well, this might be a problem. Okay, it might be a problem. Maybe I should look into it. But I know the patients in my practice who are going to be successful, that are in the contemplation stage, the ones who are going to be successful are the ones that are skeptics. Because skeptics say, I'm not sure I believe this. I'm going to look into it a little more on my own. And I always say, thank you, great, just go for it. If you need some guidance, here's some things to read, but look for yourself. Great. The ones who aren't going to be successful in the contemplative stage are the ones that are cynics. Cynics say, I don't know that I believe it. That's not worth my time. That's nonsense, right? So you know that there's a problem, but you don't believe there's a problem. You aren't going to put any time into it. They're cynics. They're not going to change. The third place is taking action, saying, yep, I'm in. I'm going to do something. The fourth stage, you get the results. You're feeling the positive results of what you've done. And the fifth stage is keeping it going. Humans are the only species on the planet that I know of, they find something that works and they stop doing it. The only species on the planet that does that, right? But these 5 stages of change were put together by 2 authors about 15 years ago. They looked at 1,000 people who successfully dealt with addictions that were either alcohol, tobacco, or food and obesity. So 1,000 people who were successful that did not go to psychotherapy. So what did they do? What was the formula by which they were successful? They recognized that wherever, what stage they were in their own language, and they said, you know what, I need to learn a little more about this. And you know what, I just need to get going. Let's just get started here. Let's get moving on this. But they recognized, and these 5 stages, it didn't matter what stage they were at. So the key here is to first acknowledge where you are at in this topic. Meaning, I don't want to hear about it. I'm going to bury my head in the sand. Leave me alone. And people don't say that. What they say is they go after the messenger. It's like, you've all heard, don't shoot the messenger for the message. But they go after the messenger as opposed to looking into this for themselves. So those 5 stages, and it doesn't matter what stage you're in. You recognize where you're at. You say, okay, that's where I'm at right now. Maybe I should be somewhere else, but that's not where I am. I am here. I am in contemplation and I am skeptical. Okay, so let's just walk through this and let's get some more information. Or I am at the stage of action. All right, what action am I going to take? All right, I'm going to turn off the wireless every night in the house. I'm going to turn off the wireless. Or I'm going to paint the walls with that EMF resistant paint so all these wavelengths don't penetrate through. Or I'm going to get rid of wireless in the house and we're going to have hard wiring in all the rooms. Whatever your decisions are of what you're going to do, but you're taking action now. So I think it's critically important to recognize where we are as individuals right now. I think that's a very powerful, empowering stance to have, and then move from there.
Good, thank you. So just to highlight another aspect of this sort of bigger picture frame, we have in February of 2019, in a Senate hearing, top-level industry executives admitted they're not doing any studies on 5G. They haven't done any. They're not going to do any. There's no budget that they've allocated to test 5G. Meanwhile,
now that's because, excuse me, that's because there's no legislation that mandates that they have to prove it's safe.
Right. Yes, thank you.
That's why.
Meanwhile, the independent science on wireless is in the thousands of studies that have indicated there's a harmful biological effect. The 1972 U.S. Navy report with 2,300 studies, I believe, and then the Bioinitiative report with 1,800 studies as examples. And there's also millimeter wave radiation studies, independent studies, that show potentially even greater effect of these higher frequencies. Very serious problem, but you're right, there's no mandated law that requires them to do this. So we have essentially a corporatocracy or a technocracy or this kind of system that has been running to allow all of these harms over the decades, right, that you mentioned since the 1940s with nuclear testing and through to the current day with 5G and EMF. Talk to us a little bit about the weight of evidence principle and or the precautionary principle and or how we can drive our actions forward, Tom, so that nothing like this can ever happen again. So that, how do you see that happening to ensure the safety of products and technology in this big picture so we don't keep having to put out these fires?
I don't see that that's possible. I think it's human nature to take advantage of opportunities. And for some, their conscience is left behind. It's unfathomable to me that we have people who are saying we need to take the filters off of the coal burning power plants so more mercury can go into the air. But that happened a few months ago, and it was passed by our current administration. And they don't have to put these Clean Air Act regulated filters on coal burning power plants. And it's unfathomable. So there is no rationale for that except pure profit. And those are the people in charge of the movement of dollars in our country. And they allocate as little as they can, but enough to our elected officials. So our elected officials pass legislation with no teeth, like the Toxic Substance Control Act of 1976, which is still the guideline on toxic chemicals. And there are no guidelines on electromagnetic emissions. We have no guidelines because Congress will not pass legislation. So I don't know if we can change that dynamic. We have to demand more of our elected officials, that they get some guts and stand up as they should. But then they say, well, good, thank you so much. But then they vote to their pocket way too often. But the only way that I know of to save the planet, and this is a bigger picture view than just 5G, but it includes 5G. The only way I know of to save the planet, Einstein is attributed to saying, the problems we've created today cannot be solved with the same level of thinking that created the problem. We have to up our game. And all of our adults are locked into their neural networks and how their brains think and how they process problems. So it's the next generation, it's the children that we have to protect. And we're doing a terrible job because now it's 1 out of 26 are on the autism spectrum. When I came out in practice, it was 1 out of 10,000. And scientists, biostatisticians at MIT tell us within 10 years, it'll be 1 child in 2 on the autism spectrum. 1 in 2. And we have our heads in the sand. We're not doing anything about this. We're still driving our Cadillac Escalades, and there's nothing wrong with Cadillac Escalades, but these big gas guzzling things that we don't need. And we keep using a plastic bag at the supermarket to put our carrots in, and we get home and we throw the plastic bag away as if it disappears. No, we don't use them again. We don't have a consciousness of saving, not just saving the planet, but saving your lineage. My granddaughter, my 3-year-old granddaughter, will not be able to find a partner to mate with who will be able to mate. According to these studies, we've lost 59% sperm count in 37 years. What's going to happen in the next 20 years? Men will not have enough sperm to reproduce, and it's the extinction of a species. That's just one little, there are so many aspects to this. But the bottom line, we have to protect the children. We have to protect the children so they can think outside the box. You can't put wireless networks in grade schools and, or put and allow these wireless towers next to a school. 1979, kids within a quarter mile get higher incidence of cancer. They published that back in 1979.
With just the power lines, yeah.
Right. Just with power lines. Now with these cell phone towers, there's so much more emissions. And now with 5G coming, it's going to be multiplied much higher again. So it's the big picture. And the big picture is we have to have a paradigm shift. And this is what I'd like to kind of wrap up with. This is 1984. Barry Marshall, a microbiologist in Australia, he writes a paper and he says, sometimes I think ulcers are caused by a bacteria. And the whole world said, what are you, a nutcase? Everybody knows ulcers are caused by too much acid in the stomach and you have to take antacids. That's why the antacid industry is always in the top 10 pills sold around the world. Is top 10. It's a billions of dollar industry. And everybody drinks their Maalox. My dad had Maalox in the glove box of the car. He'd reach over, grab it, take a swig every once in a while because he had heartburn. I didn't know what it was. Dad was just taking his medicine, right? And he was ostracized. He was not thought well of. So what does he do? He does an endoscopy. He puts a tube down his throat, takes a picture of the healthy pink tissue of his stomach. He then drinks a beaker of bacteria, a beaker of this stuff called Heliobacter pylori or H. pylori. He waits a couple of weeks until he's as sick as can be, just really hurting. Does another endoscopy, takes a picture of his ulcerated stomach. Then he takes the antibiotics to kill the Heliobacter. Then he waits a couple of weeks until he feels good again and does another endoscopy to take the picture of the healthy pink tissue of his stomach. Then he publishes it. And then everybody knows he's a nutcase, right? Because he had the courage to do that. But he proved that sometimes bacterial infections cause ulcers. And the World Health Organization said this is so important. They mandated messaging going out to every medical association in the world. Why? Because the number one cancer in the world is stomach cancer. And it's caused by a Heliobacter pylori infection. So this is a way to identify the infection early and stop the development of all these cancers. 21 years later, Barry Marshall wins the Nobel Prize in Physiology. And the top award in the world. And the Nobel Committee says, and this is word for word, who with tenacity and a prepared mind challenged prevailing dogma. Every one of you listening to this need tenacity, meaning you stay at this. And I'll show you how in just a minute. You stay at this. And you have to prepare your mind because you can't trust what you've been told to challenge the prevailing dogma because this is slowly killing us and it's not going to be so slow when 5G is in your neighborhood. You're going to notice you feel sick and it'll take years to get that stuff out of there, right? So what's tenacity? And that is why the subtitle of this book is just 1 hour a week to the best memory, productivity, and sleep you've ever had. That's not a cute title. What that is the only way to success because this stuff is so overwhelming. When you start learning about it, you don't know what to do. So you do nothing, you're immobilized. So 1 hour a week is tenacity. Every Tuesday night after dinner, every Sunday after services, whenever it is, doesn't matter when it is, but every week at that time, I'm going to allocate 1 hour to learn a little more of how to protect my family from EMFs. Or I'm going to learn a little more how to protect my family from toxic chemical exposures. And you're going to learn a tremendous amount, but only 1 hour a week. And then 1 week, you're going to say, you know what? I need to get the phthalates out of my kitchen. So let's see, Dr. O'Bryan talked about glass storage containers to get the plastic containers out. Because you put food in a plastic storage container, the next day you take food out of the refrigerator, it's got phthalates in it because this stuff leaches out of the containers. So you go to the book and you see the URLs were mileskimball.com. You go to mileskimball.com and you go to Amazon. I say, oh, I like those more. And you order 3 round ones and a couple square ones and one for the pies and whatever. And you pay with your credit card, send. Took you an hour, you're done. That's 1 hour a week. But now you will never poison your family with this minute amount of phthalates that get into the food from the storage containers. Give the Tupperware to your husband to store nails in the garage. Right? It's safe for that, right? And then next week, you're going to do something about EMFs. And then next week, you'll do something about flame retardants, but every week you just apply a little bit of time, 1 hour to learn. In 6 months, you've got this. You've got this. In 6 months, you've allocated 25 hours of focused time to protecting you and your family. And that's the only way I know that we're going to get out of this mess is each one of us takes responsibility to maintain tenacity an hour a week, preparing your mind to challenge the prevailing dogma which is just to make millions and billions of dollars. That's why that messaging is coming out. That dogma is just profit driven.
Yeah, thank you. It's really about resolve, isn't it? It's about that decision that makes in each one of our individual hearts and minds that we make, and then the outcome of that, the learning, the changes, the actions, the choices from that, the relationships and the community from that, the willingness to speak and to share that comes from that decision, right? So, I mean, I believe that we're definitely being, feeling compressed as a species in many of our individual lives as well. It's like we've never been this sort of stressed. Life's just really intense. But I believe that this is an opportunity as well for that paradigm shift you talk about, for that truly like making a decision that it's kind of like 100th monkey syndrome, perhaps. It's like more and more people do that, the more and more momentum we gain, right? And
Right.
and we don't need 51%. Thank you for your perspective, Dr. Tom, and thank you for your work and your dedication and effort over the decades and your leadership, and for joining us on the summit today. On behalf of everyone watching and listening, I really appreciate you, your work, and your time today.
Well, thank you, Josh. It's a real honor to be on this summit with you. Thank you so much.